It's Friday, and I'm back with the next in our Fanzine Friday series. Today we're taking a look at the Dungeoneer number 7. Please stick around. I'm AZ Mountaineer. This is our channel, Old School Rules, the place for everyone who loves classic RPGs and anyone who'd like to learn more about them. Each week on the Fanzine Friday series, I take a fanzine from my collection off the shelf for a closer look. And today from 1978, that's the Dungeoneer number 7. Hope you enjoy the video. It's been nearly 3 years since I started looking at the fanzines in my collection here on Fanzine Friday, and I wanted to circle back to where I really got started, which is the Dungeoneer. This is issue number 7. You'll recall, I'll put a link up here, the very first fanzine videos I did were looking at the Dungeoneer, produced by Jennell Jaquays and her gaming group back in the mid-70s. They did issues 1 through 6, then they sort of transferred the name, the intellectual property, and the concept of the Dungeoneer to Chuck Anshell. And so Chuck Anshell will carry it forward. He does issues 7 and 8. Then he joins Judges Guild, and the Dungeoneer name or IP sort of becomes part of the Judges Guild catalog. They will sell these under the Judges Guild banner. At that point, Chuck he goes in-house and works for them and helps continue to put out both the Judges Guild journal as well as the Dungeoneer for a while, and so they run sort of parallel paths with those periodicals. Well, today we're going to take a look at this one. It's number 7. This is a blue cover. It's just paper. It's not heavy stock. Paper folded in half and staples down the side. As I mentioned, this comes out sort of the spring edition, March, April of 1978. So this is a cover by Arocho. He did the cover art that was on the Dungeoneer number 6 as well. Some really cool art. And for those of you who are Judges Guild collectors, you may sort of think this looks familiar, and if so, you're right. It was later used as the cover for an adventure called Tower of Eleusian, I think is how you say that. Exact same drawing, but now used again over there. No connection between this art and anything in the magazine. It's just art. Here is our table of contents. Quite a bit of content. This, when you see the pages here in a second, you'll see it's very sharp font, but it's very small. And so, as he says, did that on purpose. It allows them to put a lot more information into these pages with less, but the number of pages is still kept relatively small. So the Laboratory is their editorial. Arcane Elders is some ongoing fan fiction. And what I've liked about it, as it went through the first 6 Dungeoneers and continues, is they sort of switched up who was going to write it each month. Because the story continued, but different people took turns being the author, which I thought was an interesting idea. Duel with the Keeper is also fiction, and it's Aaron Arocho actually writes that fiction. New magic system. Bill Seligman has an idea of a different way to do magic in your home campaign. It's quite different. I'll talk about that. Some information about attending and how to run things at D&D tournaments, at conventions. Experts is a new potential character class. Undertow and Torchlight, that's information about conventions, and Torchlight is information about other fanzines. Monster Matrix, new monsters. Twilight of Dawn is a poem. The Booty Bag is new magic items. Nose Wet or No Sweat is their traps and tricks idea. Barbarians, another character class. Some notes on Metamorphosis Alpha by the creator, Jim Ward, and Hotel California, a really short adventure that's in here. Get myself out of the way and talk about the contributors. Again, Chuck Anshell is the editor. He's taken over from Jaquays. Jaquays still has some contributions here in the monster section. Mark Hendrikcs continues. Aaron Arocho, we've mentioned. Bill Seligman has an article. John Mansfield, Bob Giglio, Jim Ward, David Marbry, and Mary Ann Moorhead all have contributions this month. So first we have our editorial by Chuck, and he explains all these things, like he has taken over and how that's come to be, the changes you're going to see in terms of how the formatting is done in the fanzine, but also he's trying to continue that tradition, which is an excellent tradition that was created in the pages of the Dungeoneer. And so he talks about the different things that are in here, new formatting, how you're basically getting more value with this because you have more words and more content for basically similar money. I think they had to raise it just a little bit. The Arcane Elders, as I mentioned, is this continuing story that's been in all of the Dungeoneers so far, and they're just continuing that story. We've got some confrontation with a druid this month. Then Duel with the Keepers, completely different story by Aaron Arocho, and it's a good story. As you can see here, very short, and sort of to be continued. A new magic system. So this is the first, as you can see from the pages, really meaty article that's in this issue of the Dungeoneer. And he has several very unique, different ideas from things we've seen before. It is not just in fact, it is not a spell point system. It's also not a Vancian magic system. And so he mentions that he has some information here. Some of you may recognize the name P.E.I. Bonewitz, which is the guy who wrote this this book about magic and how real world magic could be connected to your fantasy game. So here is a copy of the book he prepared. Collectors of sort of like third-party publications for D&D may have. This is called Authentic Thaumaturgy. In any event, he says he's read that book. He doesn't make any specific references where he's drawing from it, but he says, I do draw some of my ideas from there. So he starts with these different ideas about the laws of magic. Knowledge, name, self-knowledge, words of power, association, similarity, contagion, identification, synthesis, polarity, balance, infinite data, finite senses, infinite universes, pragmatism, falsehoods, personification, invocation, evocation, and I think I skipped somewhere in here. Then he has colors that he uses. Okay, so these different laws talk about pieces of magic, right? So like the law of names is knowing the true name of things and how you can gain control over something if you know its true name. The law of association are the ways that two things that have things in common maybe come together and can be used. Similarity, how two things are similar. Identification, how you can see the world better. On and on. And so he says your magic user would have some knowledge of at least some of these things, and that's the way he wants you to think about how magic is created. And so every spell, he said, might have one of these things. It might have pieces from 2 or 3 of these different types, the laws that go into the making of magic. And then the second thing is the classification of spells. And he said he doesn't really use white or black. He said that's good or evil, but that's really just the application, right, of the magic to the world around you. The magic itself is, in his view, not quite so, it's not good or evil by itself, right? But he does have colors he associates with it. So like infrared magic deals with the dead, the undead, the half-dead, and resurrection, reincarnation. Sort of the magic of a necromancer in some respects, also of a cleric. Red magic has to do with the body, human and animal, with healing, killing, medical science, military science, physical strength. Orange with the ego, psychological things. Yellow with the mind, the nervous system. Green with agriculture, botanical things, fertility, creativity. Blue with emotions, religion, psychic powers. Indigo, the weather, meteorology, astronomy. Purple, seems similar to indigo to me. Purple concerns itself with violence, physical passion, love, lust, hate, fear. Ultraviolet, the extremely intense and powerful emotions and psionic powers. And then brown magic deals with sensuality, the primitive and animalistic nature of things, the woods, the wilderness, animals, hunting, etc. So he says you've got those 2 frameworks. You got the different types of laws, and then you've got the different colors. And in particular, he says the infrared, which is like the dead, the undead, resurrections, and the ultraviolet are particularly dangerous areas. And he's going to have some percentages about how difficult it is and the chance of disaster when you go to learn a spell. And he says, and those are going to be sort of like a heightened chance of something bad going on. So to sort of tell most magic users to stay away from that, right? Okay, so how does this work in his world? Because again, it's not Vancian, it's not spell points, so what do? It's a very intensive process. So the player, whose character is a magic user, and in his world, that's anyone who has any connection to magic, so that would include clerics and druids to the extent they want to use spells as well. You just say to the magic user, you say to the DM, my magic user wants to learn this spell. I'm going to describe it to you, right? And he gives this example. I want to create light, and the way I'm going to do that is to catch fireflies and grind up their the part of them that gives off the light, the luminescence, and that'll create some dust. And somehow I'm going to imbue that with magic, and then when I go to cast my spell, I will toss the dust into the air, and based on how much dust I have in my hand that I throw, I'll create more illumination in the area. And again, it'll be very soft illumination, like firefly light, not like sunlight, but that's his example spell. He says, okay, so then you describe that. The DM will think about it. He'll think about whether your explanation and the way you describe using the different laws and the different colors that your magic is associated with makes sense to him or her. And then he'll decide what level of spell that would be. And in his world or his game, if you're, say, a third level magic user, then you can cast a third level spell, right? So each level, your spell levels that you can access go up, which, could mean you could go to 15th, 18th level spells as well. He's got this math formula. Take your level of the researching magic user, the level that he's decided the spell would be. You take that and you multiply it by 1,000 gold pieces. You subtract those two, whichever's greater, no less than 1. Multiply that by 1,000 gold pieces, and you get your cost. And then you got your time in weeks. It's going to take you to learn the spell. And if you successfully learn the spell, because there's a roll for that too, then you know it. And then you can cast it once a week. And there's nothing to it, right? There's no memorization to it. You have the ability to cast it once a week. And then you can also say, well, you know what? I want to go through that process for the exact same spell again, and you get a little discount, but you still have to spend gold and time to research the exact same spell again. And by going through that process, now you can cast it twice a week. And you could research the same thing 7 times, maximum. You could cast it once a day. You could cast it 7 times on a Monday, and then you just couldn't cast it again until the end of the 7-day cycle. So that is that's his process. And so you could take really any spell that's in the player's handbook, right, in AD&D, and create a spell out of that. You could have a first level version of it, which is not going to be very powerful, potentially, if that's something you want to try and do. So, and as he says in here, he thinks on the one hand, if your players are into this, it's a really engaging system. Your players really think about what it is that they want to do. They're going to have a connection. They're going to really like the spells that their character has because they've thought through and worked through, the process of their magic user having, or cleric having, that spell. Disadvantage is it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work for the players to think about that. It's a lot of work for and sort of judgment call by the DM. And you got to be really good at it or be willing to correct your mistakes, because it's really easy to sort of get it wrong and maybe create a spell that's either, should be a lower level because it's not very good, or probably a worse mistake for game balance is you have a spell that should have been a higher level, and now your player as character is out there, doing whatever. That's really just creating imbalance in the game. But in any event, this is a really creative system, and this is an approach to this I've never seen before. A lot of people use mana, spell points, those kind of concepts, or tinker around the edges with spells. But this is a complete re-envisioning of how to do magic in your game. So in that regard, I thought it was really interesting. I do like, in my home campaign, the idea of people researching new spells. I think that's a really good part of being a magic user. It was, I think, a little more the norm in OD&D, in the very original version of the rules. It was kind of encouraged that your magic users would do that. And I think bringing some of that back would be a really good way to get more engagement from a magic user, rather than just, I'm going to learn the spells that are in the book. There's a lot of ways to play around with the concept of what spells exist in your world, I think, that can make the game really interesting. Okay. D&D tournaments, John Mansfield. He's just talking about going to various conventions and sort of watching how people run their D&D tournaments. He's got sort of takeaways from that, right? And he's seen the version where people sit down and basically see how far they make it. Sometimes if you can sort of make it linear in the same, it's sort of, well, who gets the furthest? Maybe it depends on how many people are still alive as a factor on that. Another way is that the DM just picks the best players from the table who get to sort of advance, which of course he feels like is really, maybe it's fair to that table, but certainly from one table to the next, the same people probably would not advance in playing with different dungeon masters in something that's quite that subjective. And so he certainly advocates your tournament should be more rigid. Like every DM has the exact same, setup. You got some pre-rolled characters, so it's the same characters, right, going through facing the same challenges, and really the only thing that changes is the die rolls. You can't, completely control that. I've actually seen in some Judges Guild tournaments that the monsters die rolls are preset. Now you could maybe run out, right, but we'll have 10, 12, like here's our rolls, whether it's to hit or saves or whatever it is. The die rolls are already predetermined, giving you even more uniformity from table to table in a tournament, which still, the players' die rolls could change, right? But there's got to be some luck to this, right? Or else it's just sort of going through the motions. Anyway, I thought it was an interesting article. I like the idea of sort of looking at that and trying to share some ideas with people about how to make their tournaments better. Then we have Bob Giglio's new character class, the Expert, in sort of like specialization that comes along in Unearthed Arcana. This is a subclass of fighter, which he has, a little thief abilities worked in there. Got to have a 12 strength and a 15 dexterity to be an expert. And you pick a weapon that you want to be an expert at. You will get a +1 hit probability for this level. And then when you get to the next level, you pick again. You can pick the same thing, and then it'll go from +1 to +2 hit probability. Or you could pick a second weapon, and you'd have a +1 in each. And it says it's interesting, it's like, and you have to only use that weapon while you're advancing in that level. And later he says, well, at least mostly, right? And if you fail to do that, if you go back on a different weapon for whatever reason, and he doesn't like you're not really practicing the new weapon you want to be an expert with, you might not get your plus. You might have to keep it and do gain a second level experience because you didn't sort of focus on it. And you have all the flexibility in the world. You can go to a different weapon. You can come back to the prior weapon, after a couple levels and start gaining pluses and hit again. And again, only to hit, not in damage. You have thief skills half your level, just because. And only leather armor, no shields because you're focusing on both your thief skills and your weapon skills. For some reason, they roll as clerics on saving throws. And for whatever reason, he says they have to be humans. Elves already have advantages. Hobbits have advantages of halflings. And he says dwarves are experts at certain things, although not in my campaign. They stereotypically adopt certain weapons, but I don't think they have any natural advantages in those. In any event, in his draft here, he says only humans can be experts. And then at third level, he allows you to call, essentially, that you're aiming at a particular part of the human body. You're going to use the Blackmore critical to hit locations and criticals in there. And you have a percentage chance that is how many levels of expertise you have in the weapon and how many levels you have. You add those two numbers together and it gives you a very small percentage, but you at least get to roll that, and then if you're successful, you can hit where you called out there. And you get a little bit of extra damage, and then at third level you become ambidextrous. And so if what you're expert in is a weapon you can throw two at a time, and in his world without disadvantage. So there's the expert. He also throws in here that perhaps what you'll like to be an expert at is bomb throwing, fire bombs or gunpowder bombs, which I don't have in my campaign. And then he has a whole section on here, like if you would put like a Molotov cocktail, right, flaming oil or gunpowder, if you're using that, how often it is to break based on what it hits, damage for explosions and things like that. Next we have what they call Undertow current happenings. This is a list of conventions, which I think are interesting, for historical purposes, right? We've got TexCon, Princecon, Game Fair 3, CapCon, WaCon, Can Games, PinCon, Origins 4, Gahana 10, and Gen Con 11. Then the next thing, always one of my favorites, is a look at fanzines that were around. Alarums and Excursions, The American Wargamer, The Cosmic Balance, Scott Rosenberg's. I'm still on the lookout for those. Dark Fantasy, House of Shadow Press from Canada. Don't know if that's a RPG fanzine or fantasy sort of fiction, so I gotta try and learn something about that one. Diplomacy World, TSR Dragon Magazine. The Fantorgn Scrolls by Jim Hayes. Lilaf by Tom Gould. Don't know what that one is, so got to learn about that one as well. The Lords of Chaos out in California. News from Bree. We've talked about some of those, and I think there's a couple I still am looking for. Quincy Gazette. I am definitely looking for those. The Ryth Chronicles, I've heard about. Haven't seen those yet either. So lots and lots of new fanzines for me to be looking for here, right? Spellbound, we've talked about those. Terrsma-Gavus Gazette, never heard of that. Trollcrusher, Underworld Oracle, of course. Wargaming from Fantasy Games Unlimited. The White Dwarf from Games Workshop. And The Wild Hunt. So all kinds of fanzine goodness here in Torchlight. That's one of the great sources. Some of these fanzines list other fanzines that you might be interested in, and so it's always a nice way to learn more about them. Next, we have the Monster Matrix, and we got 3 monsters this time. The first one, I don't know if this is Angel or if it's supposed to be said some other way. Art by Aaron Arocho. This is a specter, but not of a humanoid, which is what you would think. At first, you look more closely, you see the serpent tail coming out behind it. This creature lived and died long before the coming of man into existence. Ancient demon cults rumor it was once a winged, semi-human serpent, but no one knows for sure. No living person has ever seen one. I think that's either they haven't seen it or after they've seen it, they're no longer living. They have cold, staring eyes that look hypnotically out of their cowl and have clawed hands. And of course the wings. The wings somehow draw the victim closer in for melee combat and give them an attack advantage. After 2 rounds, you may be able to realize how they're attacking you, and they'll lose their +2 attack advantage. Only hit by magic or golden weapons, and its touch deals additional damage to any lawful or neutral character. And of course the gaze they mentioned does charm person. All right. Next we have the Matar. Maybe I'm saying that right. This is Jaquays creature art, again by Arocho, and Jaquays also did the first creature. So this is the Matar live in the bowels of the earth. They are a race of bat humanoids, intelligent but primitive. They have basically the technology from the Stone Age, but if they're exposed to higher levels of technology, their intelligence allows them to quickly learn and master that technology, and they would rapidly become a very dangerous threat in your campaign world if you expose them to better technology, technology on the same level as that being used by your players, for example. They can shriek, which stops someone from fighting for a couple of rounds unless you make a saving throw. And bright light is their weakness. It'll blind them for a couple of rounds as well. All right, and then so finally we got this really crazy looking creature here. And this thing is called the Vosheer. And the way they explained that was Jaquays has developed this based on art and a description by Arocho. So maybe Jaquays just did the stats, I'm not sure. The Vosheer is this intelligent race of crawling humanoids. So you see this drawn here. It has 2 arms, but then more of a slug-like body. They're actually lawful good, and if they come upon a lawful good player in a party, they may essentially befriend and become connected to that person and follow you around and even sacrifice themselves to help your lawful good character survive. They have the abilities of a third level cleric, and in some groups you might even find one who's a fourth level cleric. So there they are. 2 to 20 can be seen. They can attack basically their weapon type, or they can bludgeon you with that tail. There you go. Next we have the Booty Bag, More Goodies by Jim Ward. In an earlier version of the Dungeoneer, he had these discs of Severin, and now he's got some other magic items made by Severin. The first one is the coloration disc of the dragon, and this disc turns the color of a dragon that's within 100 yards of the disc. So it'd be red dragon, it'll turn red, white dragon, it'll turn white, and it'll glow. So this sort of gives you a warning, right? It says it'll do that up, down, any direction, through solid rock, whatever. As long as you're within 100 linear feet, yards, the glow will go off. The magical disc of many colors is segmented into 8 parts, and if a particular type of magic item is around, then that sort of pie wedge will glow. Now, the downside is, if you're carrying any magic items in your party, it's going to be glowing all the time. Various types of lights may be glowing, and you better stick that someplace where the light won't give you away in a dungeon, for example. And essentially what you'd have to do is 50-foot radius of sensing. You'd set your new items that you'd found in the dungeon out. You'd have someone go with no magic items on, and then you'd go up to those items and you would get a sense of them, right? But it basically just glows based on whether this magic sword, non-sword magic weapon, magic armor, potions, rings, wand, staff, rod, miscellaneous magic that's not a book, or miscellaneous book/scrolls. Those are the different colors that it'll glow. It doesn't give you any information. It just tells you, for example, if it's gray, that there's a magic sword within 50 feet. So anyway, super useful item, I think. Basically detect magic spell for you when you find new treasure, with a little coordination to not set it off by things you already have. The poison disc it does not affect the wearer, but anyone else within 20 feet will suffer the effects of poison unless they make a saving throw. The disc of murderous thought, if anyone has ill intent and comes within 50 yards or more, this begins to blink bright red, and so alerts the wearer that someone maybe means to do them harm. The disc of incredible fumbling gives off a foul-smelling odor, and anyone within 30 feet will be clumsy and unable to judge perspectives, and causes them to have miss their first attack and have a -1 on all other attacks. And again, it's not says it expressly, but the way I read it, the wearer is unaffected, but anyone else, which would include other party members around you, will be. And finally, the disc of invisibility doesn't turn you invisible, helps you find invisible creatures. So any invisible object within 30 feet, a beam will come out and hit it and basically create a black outline to show you the shape and location of the invisible person or object. And the disc of constriction protects you from the breath attack of any creature, because it will constrict the throat of a dragon, of a gorgon, whatever, and they will be unable to release their breath weapon at you when you are wearing this disc. So, Jim was a really creative game designer. He's sorely missed in the community. Great stuff. Nose Wet or No Sweat by Mary Ann Moorhead. These are tricks and traps, just ideas, right? So here's one that looks like a playroom, except for a giant stuffed teddy bear with gleaming red ruby eyes. And if you come in and touch it or try to take the gems out, a magic mouse spell will scream, and then there's supposed to be other monsters nearby who come and attack you for shamefully raiding the child's playroom. Then we have a sign that clearly you can tell is there at the far end of a 20 by 60 room, but the letters are going to be too small. You're going to have to get really close to read it. And so then when you get really close, you'll see the sign. What does that say? It says, "Welcome to your local gelatinous cube." And right about the time you say, from the pressure plate, I guess, that you're on, or some other magic release, a ceiling opens up and drops a gelatinous cube straight down on top of you. Again, assuming you're standing in front of it to read it and having come up with some clever way to try and read it without standing right there. And then finally, the intelligent door. They give the door an intelligence like they might a sword, and it has reactions. Maybe it can speak. Maybe, as they say, it just shoots the doorknob out at you or does other things within the limits of being a door to try and resist being shoved open. All right. Bob Giglio has the Barbarian, and he says, this is not the Berserker from Dragon Magazine 3. I created this thing before that was ever released, so I didn't know anything about it. I didn't copy from that. If we have similar ideas, it's just because we have similar ideas. Lots of requirements here. Strength 16, intelligence less 12 or less, wisdom 9 or more, constitution 15 or higher, dexterity 13 or higher, charisma, dumb stat, could be anything. The Barbarian in his game is allowed to go berserk at will, only surprised in a 1 at 6, gets an extra weapon proficiency every 2 levels. A bard will begin following the Barbarian around to sing about his adventures or her adventures. Of course, you have to find a bard. He gets +1 on all saving throws except for anything that's magic created, so that's going to be a question mark about what that would mean. Has to be human, he says, neutral or chaotic, but mostly neutral. Get all your bonuses due to Constitution as if you were a fighter, and you cannot hire anyone for the first couple of levels, and is very superstitious, fights at -2 to hit, -2 damage against the undead, -1 against any magic using types, clerics, druids, magic users, etc. The Berserker skill, or whatever you want to call that, is first the display of Berserkerism will cause the opponent to make a morale check, and you'll be Berserk for 2d6 melee rounds, which you can't really control how long you're in a fury. And if you kill an opponent before that's up, you have a 10% chance to turn on your own group. And then if you lose your Berserker Rage against a particular foe, you never get to use it against that foe again. And while you're in the Berserker Rage, +2 to hit, +2 damage. And even when he or she is not in a battle, the DM is encouraged to roll a d6, and on a 1, the person goes berserk and jumps in. So there you go. They also give you little thieving skills. 4th level thief is as a 1st level thief, and you write those down. And then every level after 4th, you just add 2% across the board to those. And you can only do that if you're wearing leather armor or less. Notes on Metamorphosis Alpha by designer Jim Ward. Great game. The sort of original sci-fi game was put out by TSR way back in the 70s. If you don't know, Metamorphosis Alpha is set on a giant spaceship. And there are different, instead of being a dungeon or wilderness, there's a gigantic spaceship, and there are all these different levels, so you can just make whatever you want on there. It was a spaceship going, I think, taking a bunch of people to some new planet. Radiation hits, and so things are mutated, which gives the referee, the judge, the DM, the ability to just basically make up whatever you want. And so he says, like, people say, like, how do you do your maps? And so he describes, first off, I just, get out my hex sheets or my grid paper. He says, I don't care from one level to the next what that would actually mean the spaceship looks like, right? Because one level might be a mile long and the next one's half that size, right? And so the hull of the ship obviously would change. He said, I don't even care about that. That was sort of Jim's style. I just like to make up whatever I want to make up. So he says he draws his map, he draws his shape. The first thing he does is put down some radiation areas, and he sort of marks those off on the map. And if you get near there, you're going to get irradiated, maybe mutated, maybe killed, right? Areas you have to avoid, and then he draws whatever he wants to do. And says, the way I do that, I just think, what was this level before the radiation event? And then I take that as so this is sort of what it would look like originally, and then I change that for the mutations, whether that's creatures are mutated, robots are haywire, the plant life has gone crazy, whatever it might be, right? And so then he gives a little example here, and this is just a rectangular map that he's drawn of an area that was originally sort of a hunting ground just for recreation while you're flying through space. And you've got some marshy areas, some radiation areas, some sort of little island-like areas where he's got encounters that he's keyed up for you to find. So there you go. Here is our poem by David Marbry, Twilight of Dawn Arrival. Sky of cold darkness tossed by time, jars cling stars into the sea. Times were, now forgotten, myth, song, legend be. Islands and lands, myth of Garth, great marble towers rise from their dust. Necromancer from cold darkness fell, cloud over sun, thunder no wind, wind gust. Moonstorm mountains from shallow did rise, elements cast out of eternity. Great black thunder wizard, archmage and holder of moon key. That is a poem that ties into the mini dungeon called Hotel California, not to be confused with the song by the Eagles group by this very, very similar name. David Marbry as well. You've got a little map here, pretty rough looking, and essentially this is one of those adventures where you've got a wizard, a necromancer named Leatris, and you have heard about it because you're going to go in and explore. And so you can see it's sort of a long rectangle there. You can go over and get inside of the nearby mountain peak and look around and see if you can find the laboratory and all the goodies that went through this ancient magic user, if you are so inclined. He's got some crazy good magic items there at this sort of, a lot of these are like that, right? There's like this big room at the end that has all the goodies, and if you can get into the treasure room, then you're going to be pretty darn happy with all the good stuff you get. He's got basically like go to the tables and just roll, give him 2 swords, 15 potions, 10 rings, that kind of stuff. It's a little too much. Then there's a couple handwritten notes in here. They're not written by the owner. They're written by I assume by Chuck in here, where he didn't bother to type it up. He just had a little open space and he wrote into it. So the first one says, don't make waves. Coast along, reading comfort. See every issue. Subscribe now. Pay later. And then be a good guy. Wear a white cap, matey. Don't be shark bait. There's nothing fishy about this whale of a deal. Subscribe now. That's our look at the Dungeoneer number 7. I hope you guys are enjoying our channel. Hope you enjoyed today's video, and I hope you're subscribed. If you have friends who might enjoy our content, please send them our way, and hopefully they'll be part of the subscriber community as well. Have a great Friday. Have a great weekend, and until next time, my friends, keep rolling 20s.